And the season premiere of Studio Inter will be reviewing the Mercato with Marzio's David Amoyal. We'll be reviewing the Sassuolo game, previewing the Torino game, this week's Moggi, Moratti and Frog, and much, much more. Everything here on Studio Inter, only on sempreinter.com.
Fammi ripartire il principe, vuole andare da solo Guarino, attenzione, se ne va largo dalla destra il tiro, la spinta corta, Milito, e gol, 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 e gol.
Attenzione Ronaldo, salta anche Marchegiani e mette dentro il 3-0.
Andiamo, il principe entra in area, è solo, il tiro, e gol, e gol, e gol, e gol, e gol.
Con Ronaldo a battere questo calcio di punizione molto lungo per Zamorano che gira bene al centro, attenzione il destro, violentissimo e lo spettacolare gol da parte di Zanetti.
La prima squadra che vince qua è la nostra Inter, l'Inter vince e dillo, campioni d'Europa, campioni d'Europa, campioni d'Europa, campioni d'Europa, campioni d'Europa, i più forti siamo noi. Nulla è possibile.
Benvenuti, bentornati to another season with Studio Inter. I'm your host Nima Ruzzari, welcoming you to a new season here with Studio Inter at Sempre Inter, but it's also our 100th Studio Inter episode, and to celebrate this momentous occasion, we have brought on the English manager of the GianlucaDiMarzio.com page, Mr. David Amoyal. Welcome to the show.
It's great to be on. Congratulations on getting to 100 episodes. Hopefully my appearance will ensure you don't stop after today. So keep it going. It's a real pleasure to be on with everyone.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you. You know that. Right. And I'm also joined by the Gentleman Ultras creator, the founder of Gentleman Ultra, Mr. Richard Hall. Welcome to Studio Inter.
It's good to be back for the new season, Nima, and good to speak to you again, David.
Good to have you. Good to have you guys on, and we're also joined by two of our more regular panelists. He writes the previews for Sempre Inter. You could read his first piece ahead of the Sassuolo game, Mr. Mohamed Nasser.
Hey guys, always a pleasure to be back on this.
It's good to have you, and we are also joined by the latest edition, our summer signing at sempreinter.com. He still runs the Twitter account over at Serpenza Madonnina, but you can enjoy his articles on Sempre Inter. Welcome welcome to Studio Inter, Mr. Will Beckman.
Good evening, everyone. Happy centenary. I would have brought a cake if I'd known. I should just say that I was more a spring signing than a summer signing because
that's true.
It was more March, so.
Oh, that's true. That's true. That's true.
Yeah,
that's true.
But just to be precise.
But you just have to piss all over my intro there.
No. It's week one and I'm already being that guy.
Yeah, exactly. Well, great. Let's be that guy then, because before we get into all of us being that guy and talking about the Sassuolo game, let's get into the Mercato review, and we have David here with us, so let's get right into it. You and I, David, we're kind of the same age, and we belong to that generation of the classic rating style of 1 to 10 Italian style. So I'm going to start by asking you to give Inter's Mercato a rating of 1 to 10, and explain why.
So I think, grading the Mercato is obviously hard right when the season starts. Hindsight's always 20/20. Too easy to do it at the end of the season when we know how everything went. So I kind of try to have a formula where I ask myself, what were, in this case, Inter's needs going into the summer, and how did they fill them? And that's, I think, is the best way to grade them at this point. We don't know what's going to show up on the pitch. I'm not going to overreact to what we saw yesterday in Sassuolo. But as I see it, Inter went into the Mercato having improved at the wing-back position. That was definitely their weakness. They needed to give more options to Spalletti up front. It felt like Icardi and Perisic were really the only quality players. Then you were left with Candreva, Eder, and Caramo, who, had his flashes, but isn't someone you can really count on. And they had to add a little bit more to the midfield. So if you look at that, Versalco and Asamoah, I think, are outstanding additions. Even Versalco has some Serie A experience. Then they added De Vrij as an added bonus, bolstered a position where they were already strong. That didn't cost them anything, at least transfer fee-wise. Brought in Nainggolan, who, I don't think that deal's as much as a home run as a lot of people have made it out to be. But when you have Spalletti as a manager, definitely a lot of potential for upside there. And up front, I mean, you go from having Eder and Candreva to now having Kita Balde, Lautaro Martinez, Politano. So when I look at it that way, it's hard to argue that Inter didn't have a great mercato, especially when you consider that to address all those needs, they didn't sell any substantial player. They kept Skriniar, they kept Icardi, they kept Perisic. I think they did a really good job selling young players. So I really have a hard time grading this anything less than a 9 out of 10 based on what they needed going into the summer and the cost of it. I think they did a really good job. So that's my take on that.
That's interesting. Will, your question to David?
Well, I think that probably leads that grade probably leads on to my question fairly well, because what the 9 out of 10 suggests that Piero Ausilio worked extremely well this summer. And my question is a question that I kind of go back and forth on every week, and something we discussed a lot last year. Has he been given, has he been given too hard a time down the years? Have some of the poor signings been down to a lack of money, or has he made mistakes that he should be held accountable for? This Ausilio paradigm, David, where do you stand?
So I think, with any team, you kind of have to grade them within the context of how they can operate, what they can realistically do. I think, Inter has had some financial fair play issues that stemmed, before Ausilio's time. I think, Inter, after winning the treble, maybe kept veterans too long, operated in a way that wasn't conducive to long-term success. So when I look at how Ausilio has operated within that, I think he deserves a lot of respect. I think even the fact that we saw a player of Modric's caliber consider Inter's project, to me, that speaks volumes. We've also seen, Nainggolan, who's turned down deals to go play abroad, who was willing to join Inter. Look at De Vrij, too, a center back who definitely had market with a lot of top clubs in the Premier League, and he was willing to join Juve. Look at Asamoah. He left Juve and was into the Inter project. So I totally agree. I think Ausilio has gotten a bad rap, but I do get that for fans, it's kind of hard sometimes to really think through the context of the situation and just look things in black and white with the moves that are made. But when I look at how he could operate, it's hard for me to see that he could have done a much better job.
Regarding Modric, I think it leads nicely into Mohamed's question. So Mohamed, shoot.
Yeah, David. So look, the Modric saga has been unfolding ever since the end of the World Cup. And yesterday we saw a performance that was less than desirable of Inter. Do you think that Inter are going to pursue Modric again in the January mercato, especially since his alleged testimony or whatever, his affidavit to UEFA? Or do you think that Inter are better served pursuing someone else to cover that position for that particular economical value?
Well, look, I think if you can get a player of Modric's caliber, you absolutely try, no matter what. I have to say, I was skeptical at first when I read the first reports, but I kind of took it a little bit of kind of like the Ronaldo to Juve situation. At some point, players of that age have won so much at that club, they got to wonder themselves, what's the upside of me staying? Should I try something new? So I get that Real Madrid, maybe the idea of losing both Ronaldo and Modric back-to-back in the same window was tough to stomach. So if I was Inter, I certainly would try again. I think the only real, fault you could maybe give Ausilio this summer is that they kind of put Modric as a one or nothing type of player when maybe they could have looked for some other alternatives in that role. So I think if they can get Modric, I would look at that position in the January window. In general, another midfielder. Maybe there will be some other opportunities, like Rabiot hasn't extended his contract at PSG. One player that I really think would fit in quite nicely at Inter is Dembele of Spurs. That would be another player that I'd look at. So I definitely don't see any downside in trying to go for Modric. Obviously, you could get a player of that caliber. It would elevate Inter in a lot of ways. But I think Inter has to also really prepare a really good alternative, because that's really the only thing missing on the team right now.
Speaking of players that have stayed on this team, Richard, you had a question for David as well.
Yeah, hi David. It's just on Mauro Icardi actually. It seems to be that this contract scenario seems to come around quite regularly with Icardi, where it seems like he's linked with Madrid, and something maybe happens, a release clause is met somewhere else, and Inter panic because the new bar has been set for where that needs to be. From your perspective, I mean, Icardi always never seems to really angle that move as such, even if we've known his agent, should we say, do so. But the point being is, it never gets the feeling that Icardi wants to leave. So would you think that now, with this new contract supposedly on the table, this is now going to be a done deal again with another release clause in?
Well, look, I think Icardi and his agent, I don't blame them for using the leverage that they do have. I mean, Icardi has gotten raises multiple times at Inter, but he's been a player that has certainly delivered. There's certainly a big market for him. His exit clause was around 110 million when he first signed it. That looked like an outrageous number, but still, we've seen how the market changed. That actually turns out to be quite the bargain. I think, if I'm an Inter fan, I'd be very pleased with the fact that Icardi certainly could have left. There's definitely clubs that would have been willing to pay that price, and he could have gotten a higher salary. And instead of pushing to a move, he's kind of used him and his agent have used that as leverage to get, higher wages. And I think, especially when you see that Inter was angling to get Modric and paying him a high salary, if you're a good agent, you make note of that and you're like, hey, I got the team captain, the best player. If you're going to raise the bar this way, you have to take care of us. So, we've also seen this with Juve, with Ronaldo's huge wages. Now Pjanic is going to get a raise too. So I could see that. I think Wanda Nara gets a lot of a bad rap for a lot of things, but I think she's done a very good job, representing Icardi. And look, they could have certainly left. Inter's back in the Champions League now. There's been years when they weren't. I think, it would have been understandable had he been gone. So my guess is if they agree to a new contract, I think it's going to happen fairly soon. They're going to bring his wages in line, towards more of 8-9 million range and make the exit clause a much higher. But I always see, the exit clause, the player really has the control. If he doesn't want to leave, the fact that there's an exit clause really doesn't mean that much. So I think they've done a nice job of using the leverage that the market has given him. There's been more leverage coming between his performance and the way Inter has raised the bar with their acquisitions. And I think it's going to end up that everyone's going to be very happy with the result.
Right. We got a question because we've been promoting this on various platforms. So we got a question on our Facebook page from Daniel Hamilton, who asks, regarding Rafinha, was there ever a possibility of a return to Inter, or was that just loose rumors?
I think there definitely was some momentum more towards the beginning of the transfer window. I have to say, when Inter qualified for the Champions League and they got that guaranteed revenue, I thought it was going to mean that they were going to sign at least one out of Cancelo and Rafinha. Then that came and went. They weren't able to close the deal for the deadline, for his option. So I think since then there wasn't that much momentum. It's kind of a shame. I mean, I don't want to overreact to one match, but when you watch what we saw yesterday, that's exactly the type of player that was lacking at Inter. But I think too, Inter's going to get, more creativity from someone like Keita Balde. So maybe some of the attributes that Rafinha was giving could come from a different role. So I don't think there was too much momentum once the option to buy expired with Barcelona.
Right. From Facebook, Vanno El Sali asks, what exactly happened in the Vidal negotiations?
So this is a really interesting one because I've read different versions of this. So obviously Inter had, Vidal for like the past 2 years has been open to joining Inter, returning to Serie A. It seemed that Bayern, they were pretty much fed up with him and they were ready to move on. But then Inter, what happened is they felt they had a chance for Modric. And then, not only, so I guess you could look at it and say, okay, that was kind of silly. You had Vidal in your hand. You went for this Modric dream and you didn't close it and you lost out Vidal in that. But there's another X factor. And that is that Kita Balde, I've seen a lot of people that say he has a Spanish passport, but my colleague Fabrizio Romano knows him really well, and he's been covering since his time at Lazio, says that he doesn't have a Spanish passport. So they wouldn't have been able to sign both Vidal and Kita Balde. So Inter looked at it, look, we can get Kita Balde in for sure, and I think he's going to be a really, really good addition for Inter, and we can try to get Modric. So that's what I was told was the reason. I know there's been some reports also that Vidal and Nainggolan were seen as too similar, but I don't buy that too much because Inter was pursuing Vidal for a little bit. I don't think they got at the last second a scouting report on Vidal, like they knew what he was all about. So I go more with the Kita Balde theory on this.
Cool. We have a question from Lars Sandberg on Facebook. He asks you, do you think that Suning will be able to bring Inter back to a top 10 European side? And he also says, I love your podcast, David. Couchaland, keep up the good work.
Well, thanks so much for the shout out. Always great to have Richard and you on the podcast, Nima. So I'm glad to be on with you guys today. Well, look, I think, Suning's done a really good job with Inter. I had some concerns when we saw both Sabatini and Capello kind of leave almost simultaneously. But then you look a little bit at Sabatini's track record. Now I heard he could be leaving Sampdoria after just joining them. So maybe, that was more on his end than Suning. I mean, you look at their transfer window this summer, it's hard to argue with how well they've done. I think they've appointed a lot of the right people in the management department. They definitely have a big financial resources. Let's see if, they can get over the financial fair play hump. I think the difference, like Roma finally got off their shackles of financial fair play. I think whenever Inter does that, we are going to see Suning being able to spend more. You even just look at the types of players that they brought in. They have some veterans. Roma's going more for youngsters. So long and short of it, yeah, I definitely could see Suning being a huge asset and bringing Inter back to the elite in Europe.
Rasmus Rolikid asks us, do you think that Inter is covered with regards to defensive-minded midfielders? Inter has Gagliardini and Asamoah, but with Dalbert's display against Sassuolo, it seems that Asamoah is probably best played on as a left back. What's your thoughts on that?
That is a good question. At first, I was like, I really don't like the idea of moving away Asamoah from left back because that's been a position where Inter has struggled so much. But then, I saw Dalbert doing pretty well in the preseason. We've seen Spalletti with a good track record of getting these players back on track. But if Dalbert is going to be the player we saw yesterday, there are some reasons for concerns. Now, I guess you could also play D'Ambrosio on the left in a pinch. It might turn out that I was wrong, that Asamoah could be more valuable in the midfield. I do agree Inter feels a little bit short in that position. I have a feeling once Nainggolan is healthy enough to play, it'll be interesting to see where Spalletti puts him. Maybe puts him in a more defensive position just because he has so many more options up front. That actually might end up being a pretty good solution.
We have a couple of questions from Twitter that all kind of raise the same thing, and you kind of touched on that a little bit. But Mitch at M. Hayward asks us, what level do you think the signings will elevate Inter to, and which signing will succeed the best at the club?
It's a good question. So, look, Inter finished fourth. There was a pretty big gap between them, Napoli, and Roma. I definitely think the signings they've made this summer bridge it pretty considerably. I've been pretty consistent. I've had Inter as the second best team in Serie A. I'm not going to overreact to yesterday. I mean, look at how many players were missing on the pitch, and you had a very good thread on this, Nima, on it. Like, look, Miranda struggled, but you could have De Vrij and Skriniar as the starters. Once Veršalko starts, that's going to help. Perisic only played a half. So I definitely think these signings are good enough to make Inter, I don't think it's going to come to the last match of the season to try to qualify for the Champions League. Let's put it that way. As far as the best signing, that's a tough one. I've always been a big fan of Asamoah, and I think just because of the needs on Inter, he could be the most useful. I think Lautaro and Martinez and Kita Balde have the most upside. If just one of those two completely breaks out, look at what an upgrade that would be on Inter, having a third guy other than Perisic and Icardi. So I think those have the higher upside, but I think those that helps the bigger need, both as a left back and defensive midfield, would be Asamoah.
At Mr. Sunbari asks, should Inter play with two strikers?
That's a good question. I think the good thing, Spalletti has shown that he is pretty flexible, and having a lot of options on the squad will be interesting. I think Lautaro Martinez and Icardi complement each other pretty well, but also I think, you could also see Kita Balde in that secondary striker role. So the more I think about it, the more I think this is definitely something that needs to be explored.
We got time for one more question. We've got so many questions coming in. I wanted to ask you, at Misani, who writes our ratings, wants to know, what do you think Inter lack as the Modric midfield type player apart?
So I'm very curious to see what Nainggolan is going to do. I think it's easy to say that is that creative type midfielder. I'm kind of surprised they didn't go harder after Dembele, because I really think he was the type of player that could have brought, some of the qualities that Modric brings with a lot less headaches. So I think that's exactly the player that Inter is lacking. But I'm curious to see how Spalletti is going to incorporate once all his players are healthy, are in form. I think, creativity can come from different areas. It doesn't necessarily have to come from a classic regista. But if you really wanted to, pick an area where Inter could have done better, that's it.
Right. Before we let you go, I got a couple of quick questions. Tell me from 6 to 1 how you think the Serie A will finish, and the top goal scorer.
So we did this on my podcast, and I ended up going with, obviously, I think it's pretty obvious, Juve first. I know this is an Inter podcast, but it's hard not to put them there. I still have Inter second, and I'm not just saying it because I'm on with you guys. After that, it gets really dicey. Napoli still has, almost the entire team that finished with 91 points. I think Milik's going to have a big season. So talent-wise, to me, they're on Inter's level, maybe a little bit better. But I have some concerns, with Sarri gone. But I still have him third. I still have Roma fourth, and I had him before yesterday's match. And then I have Lazio and Milan in that order. But I think, it's really close on a lot of those teams. As far as the top goal scorer, I think Ronaldo's the easy answer. I think Higuain's going to have really a monster season on Milan. Icardi, I think, still a great shout, but there is a lot more talent up front at Inter. There could be more goals spread around. So I'm going to go with Higuain just because I don't see Milan having a lot of other options, with Immobile and Lazio still being a dark horse.
At David Amoyal on Twitter, he is the English manager of Gianluca Di Marzio's gianlucadimarzio.com. He has his own brilliant podcast, Calcioland Pod. He's a columnist on ESPN and The Athletic, and you can hear him on TalkSport in the UK and Sirius XM in the US and Canada. Thank you very much for coming on, David.
Great to be on, guys. Thanks so much for having me.
Cheers, David.
Keep up the great work.
Thanks for coming on.
Episodes, okay, guys?
Thanks. Gracias.
See ya.
Take care. Right, that was David Amoyal. And speaking on the whole Mercato rating thing, I thought, because there's quite a few of us today, it's episode 100. I wanted us to briefly just keep it short, but just go around giving the Mercato a rating of 1 to 10 and a brief explanation as to why. I'll start with Richard.
Yeah, really quickly on that, I'd say I would give it, as David did, a 9. I'd say. I just think that Inter, it's hard not to argue with anything David said there, because he did address those key positions. I think they brought in experience in some positions as well. And I also like the fact that we have got that, for me, and this is the main point for me, I like the fact we've got Lautaro Martinez, who is a bit of an unknown in the sense of coming from Racing Club. And that just, for me, is a bit of a throwback in the sense that we've got some young South American talent, which looks like, he'll be good. So for me, I think, as David said, they addressed the right things and did it in a good manner. So, we'll talk about it later, but there's reason still to be excited this season. And so that's why I'd give it a 9.
Will?
Yeah, pretty much the same. I think the 9 is obligatory because of the parameters that the club are working in. I mean, I think you have to distinguish between the operations and the way they worked in the transfer window and the kind of the value of the team itself. So, for instance, I wouldn't give the team itself 9 out of 10 because that would suggest that it was pretty much ready to win the Scudetto, and I think we saw last night that it most certainly isn't. But if you're looking at how Ausilio and his trusty team of advisors and whatnot have worked this summer, I don't think you can really go much beyond that. One thing that I would point out is that we've made 7 signings and 6 of them have at least 3 seasons worth of experience in Serie A, which is not a coincidence.
Right. Mo?
Yeah, if you'd asked me before yesterday's game, I probably would have said a 9 as well. But, after seeing, and we'll get into the game later, but the need for Rafinha or Modric or Mr. X down there, maybe it's Nainggolan. So for me, I'm not going to, it's difficult for me to give a 9 until I see Nainggolan someone play in that regista trequartista role, because that was exactly what was lacking yesterday, and that's what we needed from Modric or Rafinha. So, of course, Ausilio had a fantastic transfer season, performed very well, amazing purchases at great bargains, financial fair play kicked in the ass, etc. But the result or the conclusion can only be seen on the pitch, and until we see a full squad and how Spalletti is going to make sure that that particular role is fulfilled properly with his current squad, I think maybe an 8.
Anyone who's been listening to this show for quite some time knows that every transfer window I have my own system of grading the Mercato. I give 1 rating for the players in, I give 1 rating for the players out, and then I divide it and give an overall. Players in, I give Inter a 10 because Inter did everything they needed to do without actually breaking the bank. And in terms of players out, they got rid of everything they needed to in a good way. The young players who left all have buyback clauses, etc., etc. The only player they weren't able to offload yet, I might add, is João Mario, because the Spanish transfer window closes on 31st of August. So we'll have to wait and see. But for in 10, out 8, divide that by 2, it's a 9. Right, let's move on to something we've already been touching upon, and that is the match against Sassuolo yesterday. And well, it wasn't exactly. Before we get into it, I have to get this off my chest because I've been really annoyed with this. Yes, Inter weren't good. All the refereeing situations, we're going to talk about that. But how the hell was it allowed for football to be played on that potato field?
Yeah.
That looked like an actual donkey had been dragging a plow through it for most of the summer. What the hell was that? I mean, when you see players like Asamoah, when you see players who are calm with the ball is bouncing all over the place. You saw Keita Balde, you saw Asamoah, you saw Brozovic, you saw so many players. The simple passes, the ball was bouncing, wobbling back and forth. That's just, there's talk of the Serie A being back, but when I see a football pitch in that condition at the middle of August for the start of the season, I get really, really angry. And it pisses me off. And it says to me that the Serie A, no matter who you buy, if you can't sort that out, this is still a B, it's still a B, it's still a B league in comparison with the Premier League, Bundesliga, La Liga, etc.
Yeah, and remember that Sassuolo are one of the only 5 clubs in the league who actually own their stadium.
Exactly.
So it's even more peculiar.
Right. Well, getting into the match, if we talk about, I mean, the first half was, I mean, the first 30 minutes were an absolute disaster. I think Inter looked nervous. Inter looked like completely, like they, in my opinion, Inter looked nervous, but they also looked like a team that was halfway through their pre-season. And they look unprepared, which is why I didn't. Although we created this hype in our own heads, I can't be too disappointed because the season has started much sooner, or so it feels at least. It seems that this season has had to be started. There's like a hangover after the World Cup, and therefore a lot of players aren't at their peak like they were last season when the season started. Am I being too kind or am I being too harsh? What do you think, Richard?
No, I think you're right. I think that that first half especially was really sluggish, but I'm not too downbeat over it all. In fairness, I think that it's for a couple of reasons really. And it's not completely all down to Inter. De Zerbi set up that game in one way. I think credit Sassuolo the way they executed their game plan. I thought it was very impressive. They didn't want to come out and play. They wanted to just sit back at first, and obviously let us come out. They wanted us to be expansive, and they wanted to counter us. And once they got the penalty, then after that, it suited them even more in the way that they played. Look, as well, we've been talking about this transfer the window, and yeah, everyone has been talking about the fact that Inter are potential Scudetto contenders this year. That will affect the players. It will give them. Whether it's a little bit of complacency as well as tiredness, who knows in that early period there. But we did see it with other teams. Juventus were poor against Chievo. Roma were really taken back by Torino. No one really came out of the blocks flying, and maybe that is exactly like you say because of the World Cup and the bigger teams have more players there, etc. The fact is those teams were more ruthless than we were, and we didn't get out of the traps. Partly, I think the pitch would have suited Sassuolo because they didn't want the ball. So it's hard for us to play the game we wanted to play. And yeah, like you said earlier on as well, not all the players were there. Now, it's no excuse. It's no excuses to say that Inter still shouldn't have got something out of that game. They should. But I think that there's a lot more. I'm going to be a lot more disappointed if, for instance, in front of a full house, if it is against Torino, with maybe a few more players back, we don't put in a better performance. But that opening game, I think you may have sent this on Twitter, Nima, but it's almost like that. It's a kick up the backside that may just have come at the right time. Maybe it shows these players that, you're not just going to turn up at teams like Sassuolo or Chievo or Frosinone and win. That you are going to, even though we've got a good squad, you're going to have to be at 100% all of the time, and they weren't. But I still think we're in a really strong position. So I'm still fairly positive.
Well, speaking of positivity, Mo, you are Mr. Positivity on Studio Inter. Can you shed some positivity on some positive light on this performance, or was it so poor that you've given up as well?
No, look, I was much more distraught than normally I would be with the performance yesterday, because it was very reminiscent of the dark months of last season, the January, February. Just the whole the same game plan, trying to attack from the wings, Icardi getting frustrated, not getting the ball, blah blah blah. So in that sense, I was quite upset. I don't know why we've been hyped up so much, and why there's been an entire preseason, etc., for us to play in the same manner with different players again, even though Spalletti had a plethora of new, different, varied guys to try different things with whom he had been trying different game plans with all summer long. But on the flip side of that, I think we've been here before. Spalletti's been here before. The guys have been here before, and this is just the first match with, as you and David and I think Will alluded to earlier, with a multitude of absentees who you would imagine being, consistent starters. So while I'm very disappointed in the performance yesterday, I really didn't imagine that Squeezy, that asshole, would get another fucking headline on his wall.
For everyone who doesn't know, Sassuolo's owner Giorgio Squeezy is a lifelong self-confessed Milan fan. Which is why Mo is a bit annoyed, because seven out of 11 wins now for Sassuolo.
It's 7 out of the last 8.
Yeah, 7 out of the last 8.
It was six of 7. Now it's 7 of 8. So on the one hand, and it's ironic that the best performances against Sassuolo were in the darkest of days for Inter.
Mazzarri. 14-0.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not even a win. We're talking 14-0.
Yeah.
7-0 away. 7-0 away with Taider, of all people, scoring, and Milito coming off hobbling on one knee, scoring twice, and 7-0 at home when we had. Well, actually, that was a team I pretty much like, because I liked Osvaldo and Icardi and Kovacic. I'm sorry, the rest of the team were pretty crap, but I really liked that. I really like Osvaldo. He's always been a personal guilty pleasure of mine.
Not to veer off too much off the thing. I think that while me personally, I had very high expectations of, when you look at the match in absolutely objective terms, it's the first game of the season. It's fine. Let it go. What's more important is the Torino game at home. But it still annoyed me. It really, I can't be. There's nothing for me to be optimistic about or to look back on fondly in that game. I hear you. That went well, The only thing that we can console ourselves by is that it's the first game. There are so many people missing, etc., etc. But if you take those 90 minutes in isolation, no good.
Will, what are give me your 2 cents before we move on.
Well, I think this is a timely reminder that despite what everybody has been telling us over the last 2 months, this team's aim this season is not to challenge for the Scudetto. This team's objective, the only sort of obligation that this team has this season, is to stay in the top 4. That is the bottom line.
Here.
So, stay in the top 4 and don't humiliate yourselves in the Champions League. Don't get hammered 7-0 or whatever and go out finishing bottom of your group. Don't fall into this trap that we've been cast as the anti-Juve, this bloody anti-Juve thing that's been going on for the last 2 months.
Yeah.
Every summer, who is the anti-Juve? It's them. And 6 months later, it was no one, because Juventus are too good. They were too good last year. They're too good this year. It happens every year. They have to find a way to sell the league, because they're the ones that are trying to that need to generate excitement around what they're writing about, what they're broadcasting, and it's the same old cycle every year. So just don't get sucked into that kind of we can challenge Juventus. If Modric had come, then we'd be having a different conversation, but he didn't. So let's just focus on finishing 4th. And it's not guaranteed. I think we should do it, but Napoli beat Lazio on Saturday. Roma beat Torino away from home. They're not going to just fall away. Milan have come up. Lazio could be in there as well. So we need to keep our feet on the floor. And if that match kind of sort of helps us to get that message spread around the players and the club and the fans, then maybe it will be helpful. But yeah, I mean, just once? Can we just once against this bloody team? Just what is wrong with what happens when we go to that stadium? I don't understand it. 7 defeats out of 8. That would be a bad record if we were playing Barcelona in the league. Like that it's mind-boggling.
It's the definition of a bogey team.
Yeah.
I mean, it's ridiculous because, well, I mean, before we move on,
there are a couple of things. I think you pretty much covered everything. I would say that Asamoah was the best player, just the most convincing player. Lautaro was a disappointment given what we'd seen in pre-season. I'm just kind of rounding up all my thoughts. The midfield is a problem. Brozovic and Vecino are both come back late from the World Cup, and it showed. There was no filter in the middle. I would play Asamoah in midfield against Torino for that reason, because they're not ready. And also, maybe we should have a quick discussion about those refereeing decisions, even though they were not the decisive factor in that match.
I was just gonna suggest that, but before we do that, I wanted to just briefly reveal who the Sempre Inter readers thought was the man of the match. It was quite unsurprisingly, I'd say, it was the former Juventino, the Ghanaian fullback, midfielder, whatever the hell he is, Asamoah.
Tuttocampista.
Yeah, Tuttocampista.
Or the jolly.
Yeah. Oh God, don't. 49% of the vote, Asamoah. And then actually, the second place, he was Samir Handanovic, much to Mohamed Nasser.
Really?
Jumping for joy and happiness and joy. It was actually Samir Handanovic. And in third place, it was Matteo.
That's who I would have put second. So that's
yeah, I'd go with that.
Yeah.
I would personally, for me, it was Asamoah. It was no brainer. I would have gone with De Frey. I thought he was brilliant. Right, but before we move on, I just wanted to talk about those refereeing decisions, because I don't know if you guys are aware of this.
Oh yes.
But there is a but I don't know. I don't think a lot.
No,
of
it hasn't been spoken
this,
about much, but it's going to completely change this season compared to.
Exactly. The thing is that there is last season the VAR helped remove a lot of stuff, and it made the league feel more fair. So that's why, of course, the good people at the Lega Calcio decide that we can't have a fair league. We have to change everything and turn it up on its head. The VAR now is for the VAR to be used in the Serie A. It is up to the discretion of the referee, unless it is a macroscopic error, meaning that it's a game-changing error. Then the referee will be alerted and told to have another look. But aside from that, as we saw yesterday, it is up to the discretion of the referee whether or not to use the VAR or not. I have no words for this country and this league. This is the most idiotic thing I have ever heard, because that's exactly what happened yesterday. They have, to me, it's like they have actually created the Inter rule. We can't have Inter doing too well, so we have to change something so they have something to, so the Interisti have something to moan about, because this is ridiculous. There was nothing wrong with VAR last season, other than that it maybe took a little bit too long time. But other than that, the way they used it was really good. So instead, they've taken it away from the people with the cameras and the replays and the reruns, and they've turned it over to a guy, and he gets to decide whether or not to use the VAR, unless it's a huge game-changing error. I mean, this is so stupid. I have no words for it.
Well, I think there is one thing that I would want to say. As far as I understand, this is not the Lega Calcio who decided to do this. This is IFAB, who've made a change that's come out of the World Cup. The referee, I was reading a blog this morning from Luca Marelli, who's very good at sort of dissecting all the key referee incidents every weekend on his blog, and he was keen to stress that the referees in Serie A didn't want this, but it's been imposed on them by the international. I don't know what it stands for now. Anyway, IFAB. So this isn't like Tavecchio and his Lotito and his cronies screwing up the world of Serie A anymore. This is something that's been imposed on them. Because I don't think because it doesn't make any sense. The phrase that was used at the World Cup is clear and obvious error, whereas last year in Serie A I think it was just clear error. So it's of the as you said, the thing that is so frustrating is that the VAR the video assistant referee last night was not wrong to leave that Asamoah incident, because under the new rules he can't intervene. You know, the referee
No,
has to see that.
the-
So
Yeah, the referee
Well-
has to see that, and it's so stupid, and therefore, I mean, I didn't know that. I'd read that where I read it said that it was the Lega Calcio. that
I
decided
don't
that,
think
but
that's the case from
obviously-
what I think it's a worldwide
No,
thing.
no, it probably is, and that's just stupid because I think every league should decide. This is something that every league should decide for themselves. Because last year it worked really well. The silent check worked really well, and it should have been used. It should have been allowed to be used, and then we would not have this discussion because this is Italy, and this with the history this country has and the history this league has. This is going to cause all sorts of controversy again.
Yeah.
And it needs to be changed. I think every country should be, every FA and every country should be allowed to decide on their own. Right. So, but in terms of that, yeah. Therefore, the whole consistency debate kind of flies out the window regarding the VAR because they weren't allowed to do the silent check unless it was a clear, as it was a game-changing error, and which you can't say it was. It wasn't like somebody punched someone and someone didn't see it. And the referee didn't see it. So so we're back to square one then. What do you say, Mo? What's your thoughts?
Silenzio stampa.
Yeah.
No, no, yeah.
Oh, sorry, it took me a bit to
No,
unmute,
it's silent in
mic.
protest. No, we can hear you again now.
No, look, I think when we watched the Juve game, VAR worked very, very well against Juventus. So I'm loath to condemn the new way that VAR is being used just because of that penalty incident yesterday. I will hold my judgment until Christmas comes. Half a season, we see how it works. But what is for sure is that yesterday that was not a penalty for sure. And against the Kiev
Sassuolo's penalty, you mean?
Yeah, Sassuolo's penalty.
Yeah.
It was not a penalty.
It was very soft, yeah.
Beyond soft. And the Juventus Chievo game, we saw that goal disallowed. That, of course, we know that Sonatino now is, concussed and broken nose, etc. But that goal would have been given to Juventus any given day, and it was disallowed because of VAR. So 2 days, two different incidents.
I just think
I don't wanna knee-jerk my judgment on any changes at this point in time. I think VAR, with what Will has clarified in terms of difference in how the criteria for triggering VAR in last year's Serie A versus the World Cup. I think even with that, I think VAR worked quite well in the World Cup. So if it works as well in the World Cup as if it works in the Serie A as well as it has worked in the World Cup, I think I'm okay with that. So.
But that doesn't make any sense because in the World Cup, every single penalty situation, every single offside was automatically checked by VAR. This is a change from the World Cup because now it's up to the discretion of the referee whether or not he feels he should call it or not. So I mean, it's just, I mean, on something.com there are two comments under this article which I think is so brilliant. One guy has written, "That is just so wrong on so many levels." And the second guy has written, "So backwards, while it may sound overdone, VAR is useless when referees have a lot of discretion as to when to review and not to review." And I agree 100% with that.
Yeah, I think from the basis of, I can understand if they're wanting to have some consistency, as Will mentioned before, whether that's throughout all of Europe, so that when we get into eventually having it, it's in all European competitions, all international tournaments, there's a clarity that everyone has the same rules. And I do think that's probably where they're trying to get to, and it makes a lot of sense. But what I do really agree with you, Nima, on those points is that, we did see it work well last year in Italy. And when you talked about the history of Italy, Italian football, and it's synonymous with the referee. It did seem to be getting somewhere. So there comes the frustration. And I think finally on that point is that you've all made a really good point that if it does just completely depend on the referee, then you're almost, in my eyes, going backwards. You are going backwards. You're always going back to a point where, the reason VAR came in the first place was to stop mistakes by referees, in some respects, take some pressure off referees. But what you're doing here is moving back away from the technology and putting more. And in Italy, that will have a negative effect. So it's a frustration.
I think it's absolutely it's so stupid to have this when we had kind of cleared this situation, when these discussions were kind of dying and on the regressing, and we kind of go back to this again. It's just mind-boggling for me. But let's not stick. But at least we answered the question that a lot of people have about why the VAR was not used. It wasn't allowed to be used, and the referee decided not to use it.
It was a refereeing error,
Right.
not a VAR error.
Yeah, exactly. It was a referee error, not a VAR error. So right, let's move on, because as Danilo D'Ambrosio, aka #NotMyCon, so eloquently and astutely said after the game yesterday, now we have to win the next two games, and the first of the next two games is at home against Torino. Against the Torino, which was a very tricky side last year, even when we played them under Mihajlovic, and who I think could cause us all sorts of problems this Sunday night as well. Kick off at 8:30 CET. Going into this game, the Sassuolo, that was supposed to be the easy game. Now we're going into the difficult game. Mohamed, you said that you weren't too worried as it was the first game. Are you still not worried now that you know that we're playing Torino? Because I'm very worried.
I'm not worried. I'm not worried that it's Torino. I'm worried about the shape of the team, and I think the Sassuolo game is enough to kick everyone in the nuts and make them sit up and pay attention and get their shit in order. There's absolutely no doubt that we should have beaten Sassuolo with.
Right, Richard. What do you say going into this?
I think here is with Torino, it's going to be a tough game. We saw what they did to Roma. I thought they really, really played well. I thought they contained them for large periods of the game, and I think he obviously took that incredible strike from Dzeko to break it down. And then, like you say, they are notoriously tough opponents in recent years. For me, I'd like to just see us play with a bit more fluidity, a bit more energy. And that first initial period, you want them to think that the team can put this behind them, that it was a blip, and that they can go into that game with a high tempo. We saw them play extremely well in pre-season. I know it's only pre-season, but if we can, I don't, whether Nyangland, I don't think he'll be back, will he, for this one? But it's touch and go, isn't it? So it's
it's a bit touch and go.
So realistically, you just want to see them, as I said before, just come out of the blocks firing. Really, look, for me, the result's the most important thing. It is, because we need to get back on track. But it would be nice to see them do it with some conviction that they've learned from this, put it behind them, and start the season again from Sunday.
Right. Right. Will, what are you expecting to see?
Well, I don't know what I'm expecting to see. I'm certainly hoping to see a performance that has nothing to do with the one we saw on Sunday, because that will not be good enough to win. There are a couple of reasons to be confident that there will be an improvement. I think firstly, the fact that we're at home is important. There'll be a huge crowd. I think Inter last year tended to play with more courage at home than they did away from home, as a rule of thumb. So I think that might help them stay higher up the pitch. I think there's a lot of questions there's a lot of question marks over the team, though, because if Skriniar recovers, then that's one thing. And I think we didn't talk about that, but I think that's the first game he has missed since he signed for Inter, and I don't want to see many more games without him on that evidence, because Miranda is not ready. He came back very late, and I don't think he's necessarily ready to play these kind of matches yet. If Nainggolan is ready, then that's great. But he's been out for a month. You'd expect that he's probably going to come off the bench at most. So that's another problem. We need to see if these late World Cuppers have used this week to regain a bit of form. We need to see if maybe Vasalico is going to be fit. So there's a lot of question marks. It's a difficult game, and the problem that you have when you lose the first game is that you've got 0 points in the table, and that just piles the pressure on you until you get that first win. It can snowball quickly, And you, as you said, this is a tough game. Torino have looked very good in pre-season. They looked pretty good on Sunday as well. I think they're a bit unfortunate to lose. They hit the bar on a couple of occasions. They were beaten by a really good goal from Dzeko at the end. They're going to sit deep. They're not going to give us much space, and they're going to wait for us to expose ourselves in midfield and try and hurt us that way. So this is potentially a problem, but this is a game we need to win, because if we have 1 point after 2 games, then this is already a problem, this league table, because the others won't wait. Especially given that the others seem to have, there's going to be a really big fight for the Champions League this year. So I am a little bit concerned, because you couldn't really see a performance that bad coming on Sunday, even though there were a few people out and people who weren't quite 100% fit. So that I'm not really sure what to expect. I just hope that the team is kind of given a wake-up call and they play with a bit more anger than they had yesterday. That was one of it sort of looked like they let the game pass them by at times, and they didn't seem sort of offended by the fact they were losing. That was quite concerning. So hopefully that will change. One thing.
Okay, well, give me give me a prediction.
Okay.
Because we need to wrap.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm not particularly confident, but I will say that we'll win 1-0, and that that Politano will score. One thing I would say is that I would be slightly more confident for this game if Mr. Mazzarri is not present on the touchline, and he might not be, because I remember he was sent off yesterday, and I'm not sure what the rule is. I don't know if he's going to get a ban or if it's just if he's going to be allowed to return. I'm not sure what exactly the regulation is there. Just not seeing him on the touchline will make me less nervous, because these ex-managers, they hurt us.
So what was the prediction again? I didn't
1-0.
catch that. 1-0. And who will score?
Politano.
Mo, prediction and scorer?
Yeah, I think I'm less bleak than Will. I think we're gonna shake the cobwebs out. We're gonna have warmed up and gotten angry, like Will said. You need to be angrier and tougher. I think we're gonna win 3-0, comprehensive win. Icardi getting at least one, and I think maybe Politano, like Will said, and then hopefully a goal from somewhere in the midfield, like maybe a Brozovic or Nainggolan if he makes it onto the field. So what I'm looking for is a clean sheet, multiple goals scored by different players in different positions. That's what I'm looking for and hoping for.
Call off the alarm, listeners. Mr. Optimism is back. We found him. He went missing during the first half of the episode.
Right, Richard, goal scorers prediction?
Yeah, I'm going to go 2-1. And I'm actually going to go for a brace from Lautaro Martinez.
I think it's going to be 1-1. I think this is going to be the most difficult start to the season that Inter have had in quite a long time.
Well, since 2 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. But that definitely feels like a long time ago. No, I'm going to say 1-1. Belotti and Icardi. I think it's going to be 1-0 for them, and then you're going to score 1-1. I'm really not optimistic going into this game at all. Right. Let's before we move on, I just wanted to briefly touch on I want you guys to go from just the top 6 from 6 to 1, and who you think will be the capocannoniere. Start with you, Will. 6, 5, 4, 3 to 1.
This is, 6 to 2. You could pretty much just throw the names up in the air and see where they land. I'm finding it very difficult, but I will not back out of this. I will say 6 Lazio, 5 Milan, 4 Napoli, 3 Inter, 2 Roma, 1 Juventus. But as I said, I'll probably change my mind each week.
Who's the capocannoniere?
I think it'll be Ronaldo. I think David made a good shot with Higuain because he'll have a team there that plays for him a bit more than Juventus did. So I wouldn't be surprised if he were maybe second. But I think it's difficult to look past the alien.
Richard?
Yeah, it is tough, isn't it? Lazio 6 again. I like that shout. I think then followed by Milan. I'm actually going to go Roma after that. Inter in third, second Napoli, and Juventus top. And like Will says, it's pretty hard to go against Ronaldo. I always fancy Icardi for it. I always do, and he's got more support this year. So you know what? Just to be different, I'll put Icardi in. But it could easily be Ronaldo, couldn't it?
Mo, from 6 to 1, quickly, and the capocannoniere. Who do you think will win the Serie A? 6 to 1, and then who will be the top goal scorer? Go.
I think, like David said, first place for Juve, second place for Inter. The other 4 places are very difficult to judge. I think Napoli have shown that the wisdom of Ancelotti makes sure that the transition is going to be smooth as hell. So they could even have a shout out for second place. After them, in 4th, I see Milan. 5th Roma, and 6th Lazio. I think capocannoniere is probably Icardi again. It's difficult to bet against him.
6th Lazio, 5th Milan, 4th Roma, 3rd Inter, 2nd Napoli, 1st Juve. And I don't think it will be Icardi or Ronaldo, because I don't think Ronaldo will play the Serie A as much. He's brought in to play the Champions League. I think that's where his focus will lie. I think Icardi usually struggles when he has a really good season the season before, but I still think he'll get 20 odd goals. For me, it's between Ciro Immobile. No, I think it's Ciro Immobile. I think this is his year. Right, let's move on to the part of the show where we pay tribute, rip the piss out of, and criticize someone or something heavily in the world of football, starting with the Frog of the Week, which will be presented by Mr. Will Beckman.
Right. I'll try and keep it brief because we've overrun a bit. The first Frog of the Week, I felt, had to be Florentino Perez for his very, very hypocritical and senseless move of reporting Inter to FIFA for their, in inverted commas, pursuit of Luka Modric. I think the only reason he did this was because Real Madrid have had a horrid summer and he needed to get the fans off his back and make it look as if he was trying to stand up for the club. Because there is no other there's no other convincing reason, there's no other explanation. It was Modric who pursued Inter, not the other way around, by his agent. So if you're going to report anyone, you've got to report your own player. And also, it's what everyone does. Nobody will spend 3 months negotiating for a player if they don't know first that they want to come. So it's stupid from that point of view, and it's also stupid because Real Madrid have no pulpit to preach from on this. They have they cannot talk. They cannot shout lessons on etiquette when it comes to the transfer window. Modric himself went to Real Madrid in 2012 because he put his foot down and tried to get out of Spurs. So, and I mean, you don't even need to go back that far. You just need to go back to, you need to go 2 months when Real Madrid snatched the Spanish national team's manager out from under their president's nose without telling him, despite the fact he'd only renewed his contract a couple of weeks ago. So it has to be Florentino Perez. He's not had a good summer, and now he's going to have to suffer the ignominy of being the first Frog of the season.
If hypocrisy were plutonium, Real Madrid and Barcelona could power the entire galaxy. These two clubs have snatched players, done the exact same thing, been cautioned for it, not being allowed to buy players, and then they have the order. I mean, they did it against Inter for Ronaldo, which they didn't pay for. They did it to Inter, the very same thing they are accusing Inter of. I mean, these two.
There's
clubs are
There's
just-
Mourinho as well. I forgot.
Mourinho, Ronaldo. I mean, it's Modric himself, Gareth Bale, Ronaldo, Cristiano. It's just don't even go there. I mean, don't. These two clubs, they're just other level when it comes to being hypocrites. Right, let's move on to something slightly more positive. This week's Moratti, which will be presented by Mr. Mohamed Nasser.
Oh my God! Oh, she's beautiful! She is beautiful! Yeah!
Mohamed Nasser.
My Moratti of the week is the fact that yesterday was week 1. It's
Wow, I was expecting something more positive than losing to Sassuolo.
no fucking positivity from here this week. I'm glad that this shit happened yesterday on the first day of on the first match day or the second match day of the first week, and I think it's a good, like I said earlier, a good kick in the nuts. Everyone should wake the fuck up and realize that all that the papers have written means nothing except,
Exactly.
it means nothing without actual delivery on the pitch. And we have the squad, we have the manager, we absolutely have the tifosi to become the best team in Italy. But it's not going to happen unless the results on the pitch happen and the performances over 90 minutes, week in, week out, happen. And what we saw yesterday was, it's excusable, but it's unacceptable. You can excuse it for a whole bunch of reasons, but it's not acceptable. But the best thing about it was it's week number 1, and it's not January or last week of December or whatever. It's the biggest wake up call from the beginning of the season. Everyone remember, we are Inter and we fuck up. So man the fuck up,
Sorry, was that the Moggi or the Moratti of the week? That felt very depressing to start the season. No, I would like to say there's one phrase that sums that up, which is that I think it was Daniele Adani who said it last year when Milan was struggling after their great, in inverted commas, mercato. Hard work can replace the mercato, but the mercato cannot replace hard work.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Well said. Right, and then to the negative part of things, this week's Moggi, which will be presented by Mr. Richard Hall.
Okay, guys, this won't take long because it's fairly obvious, I think. Listen, I've been, going out and standing on different curves since, I don't know, was it 2005, 2006? And the culture that surrounded the ultras in many different ways, in my eyes, has got a hell of a lot better than it used to be. When the news is last season, a lot of the news was basically on the choreography more than anything else. And what's been even more of a pleasure to see from the change since, if I just use Inter as an example, since 2006, the change of the nature of people who are on the curve now. Families, young boys, women, Inter especially, with all different people from around the world being welcomed, and the changing environment, and still being able to have those choreographies. And that's why this week's Moggi is just the Lazio Ultras, because that statement, the pamphlet that's saying that women aren't allowed in the first 10 rows of the curva is backwards. It's just annoying. It's disgusting. We're past that. We're so far past that. There's always going to be there's always going to be certain groups. I'm not tarnishing the entire Lazio curva or ultras with that. It is a small section, but it's very backward. And for me, I think Italy needs to embrace that culture. I've said this before, because it doesn't want to leave itself with a soulless atmosphere in the stadiums, as we often see in the Premier League sometimes. But for that to grow and to be respected and to be treated as what it should be, isn't helped when groups make statements like this. So that's why they're my Moggi of the week.
Good one. I agree 100%. That doesn't belong in a civilized society in the year 2018. Well, before we go, I just have a few announcements. We're on the verge of launching Sempre Inter TV, our own YouTube channel, in cooperation with a YouTube channel called Inter Milan Destroying Clubs since 1908. We'll be recording and producing twice a week YouTube episodes for you guys. This podcast will also be available on YouTube starting this week. We're also going to do some. Got some other exciting news in the pipeline as well. But I'd like to thank Richard for coming on. And check out. I think he left.
I think he left. He was fed up.
Okay.
Oh no, sorry, I was on mute. I wonder what happened. I said, "Cheers, guys, always a pleasure." And then Will started laughing. I thought, "What have I said?" And then I realised I was on mute. My apologies. Always on the board, eh?
No worries. Yeah, the Gentleman Ultra. You can find his excellent site on that. Someone's boat is apparently making noises in the background.
I have many different means of transport.
I'd also like to thank Mohamed Nassar, our own preview writer, and who also started an Arabic-speaking football podcast. Check it out.
Yeah, check out Wara Masna Al Karesi. I'm not going to even pretend to explain to you guys how it's spelled because it's in Arabic. But thank you very much for having me as always. And also, I'd like to clarify what the hell you mean by this being on YouTube. I got my camera off and I'm seeing my fucking box. So,
No, the podcast is going to be available on YouTube. I've not gone Obama on you and had the NSA sneak like cameras into your. No. It's just going to be available on YouTube as well as part of our channel. So don't worry, Mo. Don't worry. No one's going to come home. No one's filming you. At least I'm.
We can all see into your bedroom.
Yeah.
Last year it was get Mohammed to Guantanamo. This year is
exactly. Hashtag Mo to get Mo.
Yeah.
Right. Right. I'd also like to thank Will for joining me today.
Grazie mille. See you next week. And if anyone saw Nima on Egyptian television last week, let us know how he was, because we're very interested to hear how he got on.
I'll be sharing that. As always, thank you. As always, my name is Nima Ruzzari, wishing you all a good week. And sempre e solo Forza Inter.